Kemple once again, and we are gonna do another demo here for painting. I did one last week that was like a time-lapse sort of a thing where I kind of finished a painting from beginning to end, but it went by really fast because it's time-lapse, so I'm not going to complete this entire painting right now, but I'm going to work on a couple of these objects and just sort of give you some pointers about mixing shadows and mixing colors when you're dealing with an observed still life like this, where you've got, real life objects that you're trying to paint. I chose some fruit and some peppers here because I like the colors. And they're very simple objects to paint. They're very simple forms. They're all spheres, or kind of, I guess these peppers could kind of be considered variations of cylinders in a way. Okay, so it's easy to see how light and color are behaving on objects like this. Maybe a little more than in the last one I did. So the one thing I want to point out before I begin is that number one, I have already started the painting, right? I kind of have it in that underpainting stage that I told you guys about last week, okay? So remember, the first step is and this is all stuff that you were supposed to do last week during last week's class time. You were supposed to assemble your objects together into a still life, choose them based on partially personal interest, but more importantly, visual interest and color. So think about color harmonies, think about, the interesting shapes and the forms, maybe some interesting details, maybe they have some personal significance to you, but just don't make them too complex, right? Like, these objects are perfect, and the ones I chose last week were a little complex, but they weren't too hard, in my opinion. But these are nice and easy. So, this is fine. This is good. I may have maybe a little, one or two, maybe extra objects in there that I don't really need, but it's okay. I went with an analogous color scheme. So again, if we look at our color wheel here, you'll see that I chose several colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. So greens, yellows, oranges, and reds. Okay? So those like 4 or 5 colors next to each other on the color wheel. And I've got my directional light giving me some nice strong highlights and shadows. I've got a nice, like a bright side and a dark side of the objects for the most part. Okay? The purity of the colors that you're going to see in your still life are going to depend on the purity of the light that you have. So you want decent lighting, preferably daylight. But if not, then you want a good, I have a bulb in this light that it's made to simulate daylight. But if you just have like a regular desk lamp or two, remember, you want a side that's the stronger light source, and then the other one that's kind of creating more of an ambient light. Okay? So, the one thing I wanted to point out before I actually start painting is that, number one, this is where your painting should be at. If you followed my directions from last week, this is at the underpainting stage, which again simply means that everything is blocked out on your surface, whether it's a canvas panel or paper or board or whatever you chose. Then you've got everything sketched out and then painted with flat color, right? So that's all this is. And this is not perfect by any means. These colors are not final. They're not 100% accurate. They're just sort of in the ballpark, as it were, because I'm going to paint over these like multiple times. A key to good painting is just having lots of subtle color variants for something called color reinforcement, and you want lots of layers in your painting. You want a rich kind of a layered painting surface. So this is just the first of many layers, so I'm not really sweating this right now, okay? I did a fairly accurate pencil sketch. I paid attention to the negative spaces here, but this is just flat basic color. So this is where you should be at now. If you went a little further than this, that's okay, but this is all you need for now, all right? So now I'm going to just work on a couple of these objects and just show you how to get them looking more like this, okay? But before I do that, I just wanted to quickly point out to you the concept of color being reflective. All right, when light shines onto an object, and you might have to zoom in really close here, you can see that in some of these shadows aren't just black, okay? They have color in them. And you might not be able to tell in the video, but I'm actually getting some like red factor, like this red pepper, like the shadow on the yellow pepper actually has a little bit of red in it. All right, because the color of the pepper is reflecting onto and bouncing onto the yellow pepper. Okay. Same with the green. Okay, I'm getting a little bit of a red factor there in that little sliver of the shadow there in the green pepper. There's also a little bit of a greenish hue to this shadow back here from the green pepper. So just think about, when you think about darkening colors, and we'll go more into this in a minute, don't just add black to a color. That's not what I want you to do. I want you to mix with complementary colors. All right, so like if I'm making the shadow for this apple here, I'm going to put a little bit of green in with the red to make this darker, because I've got a little bit of that green from the pepper kind of reflecting onto the backside of that apple. Okay? So just keep that in mind, because, you know, I'm about to put this up in the little holder that I have for my phone. So I'm not going to be able to switch back and forth between the still life and the painting. I'm going to have to do the overhead thing, all right? Because I can't, you know, can't hold this while I paint, obviously, because I need both hands. So I'm going to put the phone in the overhead position, and then I'm just going to start working on a couple of these objects and kind of talk you through some of these techniques, and hopefully it'll help you as you start to actually mix shadows and highlights this week, okay? All right, so let me switch over here. Maybe I can do this without actually... let's see here. Sorry if the camera's a little shaky. Let's zoom in a little closer if we can. Let's scoot this a little closer. Okay. That should work. All right. So, here is our painting. Move this up just a hair. That's pretty good. Okay. So when we do this now, we're probably going to need to mix up more of our flat color before we begin, because you'll probably notice that this paint dries really quickly. So if you have, not painted on this for a few days, you're going to have dry paint on your board. And again, this is just a board. Like literally, I took an old sketch pad of mine and tore the back cardboard off of it. That's all this is. And then I just primed it with some white. You can, again, use gesso or acrylic paint. And then I just penciled out the still life onto the board and then just filled in the flat color. And I think you can probably even see little evidence of the pencil line sketch still there. I'll try to hold this up a little closer so you can see, there's definitely still some pencil lines in there, but I'm going to paint over that so it's fine. Because red and yellow are kind of translucent colors, so they're not opaque, so you'll see through them. All right, so let's start with the apple, because I think that's the most straightforward object. So I'm going to get one of my smaller brushes. This is not in the set you have. This is just one I have, but I think you have something comparable in your set. All right, I've got my water here off to the side. Got my little palette, and I am going to mix just a smidge of flat red. Now there are a couple of different ways you can add color variants to your painting. One of them, as I'm about to show you, is to just put a little more yellow on my palette here. One of them is to, try to add wet paint onto dry, but I think it's easier when blending to try to work wet into wet, which is tricky to do with acrylics because, they dry kind of fast, but I add just a little bit of yellow to my red. And in this case, I am going to add just a smidge, the tiniest little amount of white, again, for that color reinforcement. Now, one thing that you'll want to keep in mind is that when you are mixing acrylics, they always dry slightly darker than when you put them on. So when they're wet, they're a little bit lighter, and as they dry, they get a little darker. So you might want to think about mixing a color that's just maybe a shade lighter than what you need, because then when it dries, it should darken to about what you want it to. Just a little friendly tip, okay? So this is a little lighter than I need, but this apple's actually kind of a little more on the light side. This red was not completely accurate. As I said, I just put it there to block out the shape. So what I'm going to do now is I am just going to cover this whole thing again with a new red that's a little more accurate this time. Okay? And I'm not going to really worry about any of the other colors. Now you could, if you need this for more than one area of your painting, mix up a larger batch of it and then try to keep it wet. You can use something like like a pill bottle like this, a medicine bottle. If you mix up a large batch, you can put it in this and snap the lid on. And that way you can save your paint for later. Or if you have a palette from school that I gave you that comes with that lid, if you put just a little bit of like a wet paper towel, not dripping wet, but like damp, and put it like in the center of your palette, in that big well in the middle, and you snap the lid on, that should keep it wet enough so that like it'll stay, that paint will stay moist for like a couple of days if you need it to. Okay, so I am mixing up that red, that lighter red, with a little bit of yellow in it, a little dash of white, and I'm reactivating this area. Okay, I'm making it wet again. Okay, just like that. And I need, to work kind of fast because I don't want this to dry. But if it does, I'll just have to keep working with it. Okay, now, while this is still wet, I'm just going to get a little dash of, let me see if this blue is still wet at all. Or did it dry on me? I got a little bit in there. I don't need much. Now, the key is you don't want too much blue, because then you're going to get purple, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but you just want enough to darken it. And again, if you put a little yellow in with it, I mean, you can mix the green first. Like so. Let's get a little more of the red. And then I'm going to just very lightly, looking at my still life, and I'm kind of just blending wet into wet. You should get a little water on your brush, okay? You see how I'm getting a nice dark red, and I'm not using black. I'll get a little bit of shadow in here too. Now, at this point, I kind of got a lot of paint on this brush, so I'll set this down, and I'm going to get another one of my brushes that's about the same size. I'll put a little tiny bit of water on that. You don't want too much water, but you want the paint to flow. And again, I'm just blending wet paint into wet paint. So that flat red is interacting with this bluish green, and it's serving to darken the apple. Now again, right now, this doesn't look like much of anything. I need to do several layers of this, okay? Don't expect the painting to look perfect right away. I need to do several layers of this. And if you mess up for some reason, like really bad, then wait for it to dry and then paint over it, okay? Don't stress about it. One thing that I always remind my beginner students with painting is that it's really difficult to like permanently screw up a painting. It's almost impossible. All right, so don't worry about, don't feel that pressure like you can't make a mistake because, like, you know, oh my God, I can't erase paint. You can't erase it, but you can paint over it. And sometimes that actually works in your favor. I've done paintings where I absolutely hated what I was doing, and I kept painting over it and over it and over it several times. And somehow in the act of doing that, it improved the painting because, again, with the layers, it just made it look kind of cool. And then I finally was able to get the achievement. I mean, I achieved the effect that I wanted. Okay. Now I'm going to need more layers of this. Okay, but for now, that's what I want. All right. Now we can also have the opposite effect. So if I rinse out my brush here a little bit, let's get a little bit of yellow. Come over here on the palette and mix a slightly lighter red. Because I have parts of this apple, again, you can't see it right now, but I have parts of this apple that are almost orange. Not quite, but almost. So I'm going to mix like a red-orange color. And then I'm going to go in and do the opposite of the dark. I'm going to go in, and you know, if you need to just put a little smidge of white in there with it, not too much because you don't want it like pink. You don't want like a tint of it, but just a little bit, just to make it a little bit opaque. You probably can't tell that. A little more white. Sometimes the video doesn't pick up. Okay, and I've got some lighter values inside there. And some of this is the color of the apple, and some of it is highlight. But again, that flat red is still a little wet, and it's enabling me to kind of blend the color right there on the canvas. This is just one way of doing it. I'll show you another way here in a minute. All right. And I'll even take some pure yellow. See that is straight yellow on my brush that I'm working into that red color, and it's brightening that up a little bit. If you feel your brush starting to drag a little bit on your canvas or your paper, that means your brush is just getting a little dry, and you need to just put a little more water in there. Got a few streaks in this apple. just going to very subtly put in there. They're very subtle, but they're kind of in there. I want to paint over this, but I want them to show through the other layers I do. So I'm just going to kind of work a few of them in on my base layer. Remember, this is just the first of many layers I'm going to do here. I kind of want it to follow the contours, the planes of the apple. I'm just using like the edge of my brush. Okay. And again, if this doesn't look the way you want it, don't worry about it. Just be patient. You'll go back over it again. See, already the shadows I put in earlier are already getting pushed back. All right, so I'll need to go over those again, which I will. Okay. One thing that you're going to notice too when you're painting is a lot of the time you're almost going to be drawing with paint. There is a very strong link between drawing skill and painting skill. The better you are at drawing, the better you'll be at painting, and vice versa. You're dealing with different materials, but the mechanics are basically the same. Okay. Now, another thing I'm going to show you about acrylic paints specifically is the fact that because they are semi-translucent, especially reds and yellows, you can do glazes with paint. And this is just going to be a really simple example. I'll try to do another one a little bit later. I'll show you another trick, but for now, like all these streaks here in this apple are just a little too pronounced, and I want to push them back a little bit. So if I just take some red, some basic red that I have mixed up, with just a little hint of yellow in there. And I'm just going to take my finger. It's a little tacky, but it's, I think, dry enough. I'm just going to do a layer of red on top of this. And again, this might be a little subtle for the camera to pick up here, but you see how it's pushing that red back just a little bit. I can still see the light streaks showing through, but I'm just putting a flat layer of red on top, and it's pushing back the dark and the light. So this is another thing that you can do. Like if you're painting and you just feel like everything is just too strong. It's not subtle enough. Wait for it to get kind of dry. And just do like a very thin glaze of flat color over top. And you might not have noticed this, but like in the last video I did with the toys, about halfway through the video you might notice that I changed the entire color of the background because I wasn't happy with it. Like halfway through the painting, I was like, you know what, I'm going to just change this whole color of the background. And I did that by doing a glaze of color over the one I already did. And I can do more glazes. And if you push this too far, and you take away too much of the streaking and the light streaks, then just, go back and add more. Get another smaller brush. This is like almost pure white. Let's see if the glazing works better with this now. It's working a little better, I think. You can also use yellow to lighten this as well. Got a little bit of yellow in there too. Because again, this part of the apple is almost red-orange in parts. The inside of this is kind of almost like a light green. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of light green here. Put it inside. push that back with a little bit of red in a minute here. More yellow out. At this point, you guys might be running low on your yellow, so hopefully you thought to maybe order some more. Remember, I sent you a link a while ago about that. So you can use that, or again, if you have a Michael's or someplace like that near you, maybe Hobby Lobby or something, I think they do curbside delivery, so you can call them up and say, hey, I need like some yellow acrylic paint or some canvas panel or whatever, and they'll, if you go there and at a certain time, they'll hook you up. All right. So now, let's go back to our red. And glaze over some of that color. See how that kind of pushes it back a little bit? It's still there, but now I'm starting to get layers of color. Get a little bit of this green mixing with the red. And what you usually find is that kind of makes a brown. Brown is also a great color for mixing shadows with. So, they make brown paint, which you don't have, but you don't really need to buy it. If you just mix, and I'll show you in a minute, but if you mix like equal amounts of your primary colors, red, yellow, and blue together, it will make a brown. All right, that's a little darker than I wanted, so I'm going to have to fix that in a minute. I think it just needs more white in it. Let me see if I can do that now real quick. Got a little hair in there. Get that out. Okay. Now, that's starting to look more like I want. It's not there yet. I need to do some more with the shadows and maybe create a little more of a, maybe build up a few more layers of glazes with the red, but it's not flat anymore, right? It's starting to resemble something that's actually three-dimensional, which is the whole point of this. This is what we're trying to accomplish, is making something look lifelike. Okay. Now, back to the brown. You know what? It's probably getting hard for you guys to see some of these colors, so I'm going to switch to a new plate here. Been using this plate for a while. All right. So to make a brown, here's what you do. I'll go ahead and put this in the center so you can see it. We're going to get some red, some blue, and some yellow. Now, I've already got red on this brush, so I don't really need to rinse it out, but you would want a fairly clean brush. And you just want to take equal amounts. Should be equal amounts. I might need to add a little more yellow to this. And also maybe just a smidge white too, but barely any. Now the reason why I'm adding white to this is because, remember, the blue needed a little white before. Now this is kind of getting gray on me because I think I need more yellow. It should be equal amounts, but in this case, I don't know. So now I think I need, sometimes it works out this way when you're mixing color. I think maybe there was too much blue. Put a little more red into it. I think that'll help. Yeah, there we go. So that's, you know, a decent brown, okay? Red, yellow, and blue mixed together. You might need to add a little more of the red and the yellow than the blue, but that's a nice brown color now. And brown is way more effective at darkening colors than black, in my opinion. I mean, black is something that you can add in very, very tiny, tiny increments if you are really struggling with darkening a color. But don't just use solid black, because black is bad. And I'll show you why. Alright, so brown, that's what we want. That's the good stuff. So I'll save that there. I'm going to use that in a second. But let's say we're going to take some yellow and darken it. Like I've got this yellow pepper here. If I want to make it darker, here's what happens if I want to make shadows on my yellow pepper. Okay? If I am using brown, got a lot of brown on that brush. Let's get some of that off of there. Let me get another brush here. Rinse it off a little bit better. Okay. So here is yellow with some brown. that's still kind of in the yellow family. That actually makes sense to me. Okay? To lighten it, just add a little more yellow to it. Okay? But now, if I were to add black instead, let me get another brush. I use my small brush here. And I'm just going to take the littlest amount of black. Get a little bit of yellow here. Actually, I use this yellow from over here on this palette. Now, you might not, hopefully you can tell from this, but that is like a funky, like puke green color, right? That is not what you want. I don't see anything resembling this color there. This brown, this yellowish brown, is much better than this puke green. So black is just not a great way to darken colors. So avoid it, okay? So that's not what we want to do. Yuck. Get rid of that. Okay, so let's focus on the pepper. Oops, got a little bit of brown on there. Just wipe it off. The great thing about the brown too is that it will work really on any color. It'll work in the red family, it'll work in the greens, it'll work in the yellows and the oranges. So again, to darken colors, either use a little bit of that color's complement. So like if you're trying to darken red, use a little blue or a little green or some brown. And vice versa, if you're trying to darken green, use a little red or a little brown, okay? All right, so